Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Whitaker, trauma specialist, empowerment strategist, and shadow guide. And I wanted to do this video today to clear up a little bit of confusion about the difference between introspection and interoception. The words are super similar. I hope I don't get tongue-tied, so forgive me if I do. And the differences are nuanced and subtle, and also the effects are monumental whenever you break it down and you look at the why. So come with me on this journey today, because as we talk about the difference between these two concepts, it's going to be impossible for me to talk about it without neurobiology. So there's going to be a little bit of a neurobiology lesson today. So first of all, introspection. Introspection is looking inward to examine one's own thoughts and feelings. So when we reflect on our thoughts, emotions, and memories to examine what they mean, we're engaged in the process of introspection. Introspection holds value, but it can also go sideways. It can become a form of armchair soul searching, which is a way to mentally understand and make meaning while still bypassing any input from the subconscious mind. The biggest problem with introspection is that research has shown that people are largely unaware of many of the workings of their own minds. And we're surprisingly unaware that we're unaware. And this is the origin of cognitive biases, because cognitive biases are a good example of how people are often unaware of their own thoughts and biases. And despite this unawareness, people tend to be very confident in their own introspections. So when evaluating the self and others, a person will give greater weight to any introspection about themselves while simultaneously judging others on their outward behaviors. The problem is that even when introspection doesn't provide useful or accurate information, people will remain confident in that their interpretations are correct. And this is a cognitive bias. It's a phenomenon known as the introspection illusion. So now let's shift and talk about interoception. Interoception is the perception of sensations from inside the body. It's listening to what your body is telling you, but you're not listening with your ears. You're listening with your brain and your entire being. So again, we're going to get to the neuroscience in a minute, but because we're listening to the brain, that's why we have to go into the neuroscience about this. Interoception includes the perception of physical sensations related to internal organ functions, such as heart rate, respiration, satiety, as well as autonomic nervous system activity related to emotions. And these are important to become aware of because these are all physiological functions in the body that can become dysregulated by trauma. And many of the perceptions remain unconscious to our explicit or conscious mind. And it's through interoceptive awareness, which involves the observation and processing of our inner sensations, nonverbal sensory messages our implicit mind sends up from the body upward to the explicit conscious mind, that can become available to our conscious awareness. So that was a mouthful. It's through our conscious awareness that we're able to identify what needs processing, healing, and integrating within us. In other words, interoception is fundamental to healing the trauma imprints held by the body. So if you're wondering about the link between the body and the subconscious mind, I'll tell you a secret. The body is the subconscious mind. It's largely nonverbal, so only using words to process past trauma will only take you so far until you eventually plateau. And why is this so important? Well, here's why. And this is the part that requires some neuroscience, because the why is directly tied into your physiology. So our ability to be interoceptive is governed by the insular cortex in the brain. And surprisingly, the insular cortex is something people don't talk about, but it is fundamental to trauma healing. So we need to start sparking up these conversations. The insular cortex, also known simply as the insula, is a deep layer of the cerebral cortex. It's buried behind the lateral sulcus of the brain, and it's part of the limbic system, which is the center of emotion and memory in the brain. The insula and the amygdala are both in the limbic region, and the amygdala is the fear center of the brain. It's the fire alarm that often gets pulled when there isn't actually a fire or threat. And because of the connection between the amygdala and the insula, it's important first to settle the amygdala when that fire alarm is going off. So there are a lot of techniques, somatic techniques, deep breathing, yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, mindfulness practices, meditation. These are all important and valuable ways to relax the body. And when the body starts to relax, it will send signals up to the brain that the body's relaxing. And these signals will calm the amygdala and turn off that fire alarm. So relaxing the amygdala is the first step to trauma work. However, a lot of practices stop there. And there's a larger goal to actually work with trauma, especially if the trauma has caused a disconnect between the mind and the body through numbing and dissociation. And when there's numbing involved, the body and the mind have been ripped apart. And when this happens, the mind will often override the body, which is where that numbing comes from, because the mind takes over and just ignores any signals the body sends. So the two must come back together for healing to occur. And feeling into the body is a prerequisite skill for trauma healing approaches. So the next step is to get the insula back online. And that's because the insula is a limbic structure in the brain that allows us to sense into our bodies. It's what allows us to be interoceptive, or connecting with that felt sense in the body. The insula is responsible for allowing us to sense internal signals such as temperature, hunger, anxiety, and it's also key to proprioception. And proprioception is a really big word, but it's simply how the brain or the mind knows our position in space. So I can put my arms up like this, close my eyes, and my brain still knows the position. I can move, I can contort myself into different positions, and the brain still proprioceptively knows. So without the insula online, people can get stuck in introspection, bypassing interoception. And when we get stuck in introspection, that is simply the conscious explicit mind trying to process the conscious explicit mind. And it doesn't work that way, folks. Sorry. To process emotion, we must first experience emotion. And to experience emotion, we have to be able to feel into the body. And if we aren't feeling the body interoceptively, then we aren't really feeling our emotions or experiencing our emotions. If we're not experiencing that and feeling into the body, that's something else entirely, and it's often referred to as emotional bypassing. So a couple things about the insula. The insula, on one hand, can be underactive, and in which case a person might have a hard time feeling and sensing internal experiences. The person might experience ambiguous or vague feelings. So a person might say, I feel like shit, or I just don't feel very good. But they won't be able to expand on what that actually means if you ask what it means. An underactive insula is associated with numbing, whether it's emotional numbing or physical numbing. It's likely an underactive insula that's the culprit. Cutters often fall into the category of having an underactive insula, and their behaviors are actually less about self-harm and more about getting the insula to feel again. And cutting itself is a subconscious behavior. The conscious mind might make up all sorts of shaming stories about cutters, and it is true that the behavior, the subconscious behavior, there is danger to it. But I think we need to reframe it and start looking at it more compassionately, because it is a subconscious attempt to get the insula back online. On the other hand, the insula can also be overactive. And this happens when a person focuses on every little sensation in the body. An overactive insula is related to anxiety and panic. Let's say a person with an overactive insula notices that their heart rate is elevated. And this can lead the mind to catastrophizing that the person is having a heart attack, which is anxiety and panic that intervenes whenever it feels the heart rate elevated. And this could even lead to an ER visit. And in such a case, the insula is on one hand telling you the truth. Yes, your heart rate is actually elevated. And on the other hand, it's kind of lying to you and gaslighting you. No, you're not actually having a heart attack. So there are ways that we self-gaslight, and this is one example, not the only, but one. So the thing about the insula is that introspection does absolutely nothing to work with the insula, whether it's overactive, underactive, or healthy and vibrant. A minor shift, like a subtle click of the dial, we're not turning it all the way up. But if you remember on the old car radios where you just barely turned the dial and finally the radio station comes in clearly, and it was just a slight move, that's what we're talking about. That's the shift from introspection to interoception. But these subtle shifts are what lead to huge results. So when the insula isn't intact and working, there is really no trauma work that can be done. And there are many ways to get the insula back online. So circle back to some of the things I mentioned earlier. Practices like meditation, yoga, tai chi, qigong, dance, movement, anything that helps connect the mind and the body can start to re-engage the insula. Resourcing, which is a technique that I teach in my resiliency workshop, is another great place to begin to start to connect the mind and the body interoceptively together again. The key is to allow yourself to feel into your body and experience the emotions and sensations and those nonverbal signals that your body is sending up to your brain. You'll grow your capacity to feel a wider range of emotions, and that means you'll experience more joy, more happiness, and more pleasure in life. The caveat is that you'll also feel more anger, more sadness, and more fear. But please don't let that scare you, because when you have more capacity, those so-called negative feelings don't have the same effect. Even though the feeling is bigger, you have a wider range of capacity for what you're able to handle. So the impact of the feeling isn't as detrimental to your health and well-being as it was whenever your capacity was really narrow. Even just a little frustration could throw you off. Whereas if you have a much wider window, you're going to have bigger ups, bigger downs, but those downs might still be within your window of tolerance. And one other thing I'd like to finish with is it's best to practice introspection after interoception. Because once you have felt and sensed into some of the emotions that your body experiences, when you stop numbing and when you stop panicking and you can be still and experience that emotion, and then after you experience that emotional sensation or physical sensation in your body, then go into your mind and become introspective. Because if you want to create new meaning in your life, you have to do it from a different aspect of your mind. I hope this helps you understand yourself and your own physiology a little bit better. If you found this valuable, please subscribe. And or send this on to somebody else who also might find this information valuable. And if you have any questions, reach out to me. I look forward to hearing from you, and happy self-discovery, everyone. I'll see you next time.